Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, the co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. There's a lot of news this past week with our president, and there are a lot of problems. They're worrying about the deficit and budgets and a lot of other things. But we want to sort of follow up on what Daniel and I had been talking about, and that was, Syria. And that was a big event. And of course, our studio and our program have been strongly supporting Trump on this, even though there's a lot of his enemies out there, Republicans and Democrats. It's all just a partisan thing. And but now, in addition to this, just when they were really bearing down on Trump, we were very impressed by what we want to talk about today, is that it isn't only Syria he's trying to wean ourselves off. He said, it's time to come home, time to get out of Afghanistan. And he says one half of the troops are on their way out. Now that is good news. And of course, always the question is, we still have questions about Syria. Let's see it first, and let's make sure it's a clean cut, and that you don't leave a lot of stragglers like CIA and other agents in the country, or too much interference. But this is 7,000 out of 14,000 is very good. I think last summer Trump added troops, and he's always admiring the military, and he's always taking a lot of advice from the military. And at one time, he had this statement: "Let the military decide. I'm deferring to the military. They can just do it. They don't have to wait for me to tell them." One good thing, Chris, that I think might come of this is the fact that Trump may not blindly accept the military advice from military people. They're trained for war. A president elected by the people who advocates not fighting war, which they all do, maybe they should take advice from the people. Just think about back when George W. Bush was elected. He was for, a non-interventionist foreign policy, not policing the world and all these things, and just look at what happened after that. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that maybe there's a significant change here, but it's a long way to go to unwind an empire. And they haven't even introduced the problems that can come when a country goes bankrupt. And we've spoken so often on the air on this program how we think our finances are going. They're bad, so this will end someday. But why don't we wise up a little sooner? And that's why not only was I happy with getting out of Syria, I'm also very pleased that his plan is to pursue it in Afghanistan. Let's hope he has plans to do more than 7,000, and I hope he follows through with it and not back down because there's a lot of noise out there. Because I believe that the people who elected Trump, he said enough favorable things about stopping these wars that he sticks to this and really pursues this. So I'm pleased with the way things are going to a certain degree.
Yes, and not just with Trump. Americans have been for decades voting anti-war candidates in. George W. Bush ran on anti-war. He was no more nation building, no more bullying other countries. Then President Obama and President Trump. Politicians know that the sentiment in America is not empire. But once they get in, they have to deal with, by far, the biggest crony special interest of them all, and that's the military-industrial complex. And they either lose the courage that they have, or they just forget about everything that they promised to the Americans. And we've been disappointed for decade after decade that nobody is ending these wars and bringing the troops home. But in this instance, it's President Trump deserves high praises for showing the courage to actually do what he said he was going to do.
Yes, and if you add up all the Mideastern wars, and we really can do this because Syria is not separate, Afghanistan is not separate, Iraq is not separate, but the wars that we have pursued as a result of 9/11 is the estimate is well over $5 trillion and close to $6 trillion. But that really doesn't add up everything. This is just the budgetary amounts, and there's a lot of other things that go on. So it's a huge amount of money. And if in Afghanistan, though, it's recognize that cash out was over $1 trillion. Now that's a lot of money. Now the excuse has always been that 9/11 justified it all, and yet I think some of the neocons were rather careless in their speaking out after 9/11. They were sort of a little bit pleased, but now we have a real reason to do what we've always wanted to do, remake the Middle East. They never listened to what bin Laden had said, because he gave reasons why we don't know exactly his role, but he gave the reasons why Al-Qaeda was there and this happened. And he gave 3 reasons, but we never really talk about that. One was the constant bombing and destruction of Iraq and the children that died there. And as bad a guy as he must have been, you have to say, well, maybe he has a point. He also was very unhappy with how the United States policies, mistreated the Palestinians. So that was a big issue. But there was also a religious issue involved for their justification, and that was the putting on Saudi soil, which to some of the Islamists is holy land. And that was even admitted after 9/11 that this very well could be the case. So we took some of the troops out, but we had troops stationed there. So those were the reason given. But that isn't the reason we're over there. We're over there to stop, terrorism and radicalism, believing that is what instituted. No, it's very clear in many people's mind that our presence there, whether it was Iraq or interference in Iran, all these places, we incite people to it. And there's a big difference. So right now they're saying, the hawks are saying to Trump, this is so immoral and so horrible, deserting all our troops and leaving Syria. Well, staying there is an incitement for more terrorism. So if you remove the incitement, they're going to be awfully disappointed. So I wish they would look more at the basic cause of the initial problems rather than just using it as an excuse to continue it and expand it. And so far, it's worked well for the neocons since 2001. But that's why this 17-year war in Afghanistan has worn the American people down, and the American people are ready. Enough is enough. Let's come home.
Yes, and while we have high praises for the president, we do have to take his actions on a case-by-case basis, because politicians, and especially Trump himself, they're masters at misdirection. They have you looking one way, and on the other side, they're doing their mischief. And the president has already done that with his so-called tax cuts. I mean, since government spending went up, he's just taxing us more. Our taxes are going up. And with NAFTA, he just basically put a new wrapper on it, and it's still a global scheme. So we have to also be cautious, because it wouldn't be good if the president is pulling troops from one unconstitutional war and to throw them into another unconstitutional war, say against Iran or China or Russia. I mean, that wouldn't be good. But that hasn't happened, but we have to be cautiously optimistic.
Yes, and I think there's a reason for Trump to be this way, if you understand, the philosophy of government, because he's not a non-interventionist. So he doesn't support our basic principle of non-intervention, just stay out of it, and that's our reason for staying out and getting out. But he's a pragmatic person. He's a utilitarian. Some people say, well, that's good. You compromise between two sides. No, it's a whole philosophy in itself. It allows Congress and presidents to do what they want on the moment, spare. Oh, okay, this looks reasonable. We'll do it this way. Instead of working from a basic principle, we don't have a right to be there. We don't have the authority to be there. We don't need to be there. We need to leave. And one thing that happens when our government and our foreign policy is run by this utilitarian attitude, they let our governments in the executive branch drift into wars. Then all of a sudden, when they linger and they don't go well, whether it's Korea or Vietnam or the Middle East, then they start asking these questions. Well, why did we go in here? And the American people wake up, yeah, it's costing a lot of money. Just look at these problems. And then they have these questions. What is our purpose? How long are we going to be there? When are we going to leave? All the questions that should have been asked before we went in. And that would go a long way, because that would be following the basic constitutional principle that we shouldn't go. We should automatically say we shouldn't go. We don't belong over there. And if we have to go, and if our national security is threatened, and the American people think that it's necessary, they prod the Congress into debating it and making a decision and ask all these questions and answer them and know, well, why we're going and what victory means. But no, here we've gone 17 years, and they're just really getting serious about the questions. And the neocons and the militarists are just, annoyed to no end. And yet we're 17 years too late. And that's why these questions have to be answered. And we should answer them in a pragmatic way. It's cost too much money, too many people died, and all these things, and we're not winning. But we also should address the subject of how we got into it, how we get into these kind of wars, and so to try to prevent it. And the founders did their very best to try to keep us out of foreign entanglements, but we didn't listen well, and it's worse than ever. The Congress doesn't assume responsibility. They dump it or give authority to the president, and then they get annoyed. Congress gets annoyed if the president, has a failure. But if we were more strict with following our Constitution, we'd have a lot less problems like this.
Yes, I'll finish, Dr. Paul, by stating the obvious. The military-industrial complex has bankrupted America. That's just the fact. They've done it. It's done. And they're used to continually extracting trillions and trillions of dollars. That's why the pushback to this is so all-encompassing. It's everywhere. It's very hard to find voices unless you talk to normal Americans. They'll say, "Of course we have to get out of there." So once again, praise for Donald Trump for taking these initial steps, and it's good to do it now voluntarily while you can. Otherwise, it's going to happen during a financial crisis, and the situation could be much, much worse.
Very good, Chris. Thank you very much. And I want to give a brief overview of this, because I believe it's the foreign policy that is all important on why we go there and what's going on. But the big picture I see it is that whole area and the remaking of the Middle East has to do, in the big picture, that is, there has been a conflict going on in that area between Sunni and Shia Muslims, and that has existed for a long time. And of course we know that Saudi Arabia is more Sunni, and Iran is Shia. And everything we do seems to be involved in that, because it's the whole region. It also has to do with oil that is so important. And I think Israel has a lot to say about this too. They have an interest in the area. They want security and all these things. And then we have an interventionist foreign policy. And we've been involved too long. And when you think of the total failure that there was of the policy, it was not looking for the right reasons. 9/11 occurred, and it was radical Islamists that did it, and therefore we have to go get them. And but we want to get pipelines in Afghanistan, and we want the oil out of Iraq and this sort of thing, even though they basically had nothing to do, with 9/11. And so we had to beat the drums of war against Saddam Hussein, get rid of him. As bad a guy as he was, he had nothing to do with 9/11. So we went after him, and then also, of course, we went into Afghanistan and didn't even consider anything as it occurs today, that maybe Saudi Arabia is precipitating some of these problems. And that is one of the reasons why I think we persist, because we don't know exactly why we get into this. But we are going broke. There's a lot more expenses to pay for, as time goes on, because, we've run up a lot of debt that came out of the military. It's $6 trillion, for these wars. We have to pay interest on that. So somebody's making some money just paying the interest. That will continue. It's part of the $22 trillion national debt. And so that's ongoing. But what about the ongoing necessity of paying for the care of our troops when they come back? There was over 20,000 wounded in Afghanistan. So that will continue for a long, long time. And the people don't realize that there are limits, and that if we don't decide that we have to finally cut back in all areas, it's going to be a calamity. We've gotten away with this because the world has permitted us to print the reserve currency. So we've had an extended life on a system that doesn't deserve to do this well. But long term, though, the debt just gets bigger, but it has to be paid for. And then there will be much more real problems than we see today, because superficially people could argue, well, I think it's just all politics and they're fighting in Congress about the budget and about a wall and this sort of thing. But no, there are some structural things wrong. There's deep-seated problems with our foreign policy, deep-seated problems with a Keynesian-run central economic planning system, deep problems with the idea that the Federal Reserve has this authority to print money out of thin air. And someday we're going to have to address that, and that day is coming quickly. And these predictions or these hopes, when we see a move in the right directions, are always we have to be cautious. I remember when the Korean War first started, and MacArthur went in there and he had a lot of victories and things back, and he ran the North Koreans back, and he's going to have the troops home by Christmas. And guess what? The Chinese decided we wouldn't go home for Christmas. Now, right now, we're sort of liking to get our troops home for Christmas. I hope we're more successful than we were in Korea getting the troops home for Christmas. Right now, of course, we're doing a little bit better in Korea than we are in Afghanistan and some of these other places. But really what we have to think about is the principles of liberty, our Constitution, and the reason why peace is so much superior to war. The American people are with us for this. It's just that the message has to get out there. I think it's so discouraging at times that we have such a powerful message, in the sense that liberty is really a wonderful thing, because it is the way to peace and prosperity, and yet the message isn't delivered very well because people keep picking and being complacent and allowing our governments to do the things in the opposite fashion. But when events like this happen and we have a president that does pick out a few things and moves in the directions that he said he was going to move, that's wonderful. So we should encourage the president and hope that we can turn around and say, hey, this was a great Christmas present, and the change in foreign policy on Syria and now Afghanistan is the beginning of a much better foreign policy. That would be a great Christmas present. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.